We're back. And so, as we mentioned before, to leave you hanging in the first half, we have a little bit of physical evidence to go along with the ancient atomic weapons hypothesis, since literary accounts are perhaps can be sometimes deemed unreliable. You have places that are usually cited or referred to that are examples of perfect evidence of something happening, of some type of weapon being deployed on these, or some type of event causing strange remains and damage to buildings, things like this. Usually, the two major sites, archaeological sites, that are usually referenced are Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. Usually Mohenjo-Daro more than any of the other ones.
So did they find like a shell of an old bomb or something?
No.
Because that would be fucking awesome.
Yeah, that would be super cool if they found a shell of an old bomb. That would totally upturn everything that we know. But usually, you have like these two places. Mohenjo-Daro specifically is an archaeological site of one of the largest Indus Valley cities, which apparently thrived from around 2000 BCE, so before Common Era, so 2000. Was that 4,000?
4,000 years ago, yeah.
And so this is usually the big one that a lot of ancient atomic weapons proponents will point to, being that the evidence that's cited is that Mohenjo-Daro had a series of bodies that were discovered within the city itself. So you had a number of bodies that seemed to be laying unceremoniously or unburied in the streets. Some of them seemed to be holding hands, like they had been perhaps struck down suddenly, like just being on the streets or something like that. These bodies have been discovered between 1922 and 1931 when they were originally excavating the city. And there's a total of 37 bodies that have been found. So this is usually the one that's kind of pointed to as the place to be, or these I think it's Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, and I think, is it Jodhpur or...
Jodhpur is like the modern city around there.
Right.
But they're pretty close.
Yeah, they're all within that little area, and these are the ones that are usually pointed to, saying that, you know, the bodies that were found here are found in such a position that would possibly indicate that they had been struck down in an instant, or, you know, that something had happened so quickly that the inhabitants of these cities didn't have time to react, and so they were just kind of, you know, as would probably happen with a nuclear weapon of some type.
Well, yeah, if you were, say you're on the outskirts of like the air blast, you wouldn't see it coming. It would just hit the town and hit the people. You just go flying through the streets and you just end up dead wherever you landed, pretty much. I guess, because it wouldn't have been, if it hit, like the bomb hit the city, would the bodies just be intact, just like lying there, or would they be like vaporized if there was like a direct hit?
Well, I mean, that's a really good question. As you know, seeing as a lot of the city, which was mainly constructed of pretty much just like mud bricks, is still standing.
Right. So then it would have been maybe not.
So what you're saying is mud bricks are invincible to nuclear weapons.
If you want to build a bunker if you want to build a bug-out bunker, mud bricks is the way.
Mud bricks.
So yeah, it's usually pointed to that, and it's always referenced that some of these skeletons exhibit some type of, higher background radiation than other, their surroundings. So it's like that they had absorbed some type of large amount of radiation than their surroundings. So it's being like, okay, well, now this atomic radiation, yeah, they're irradiated. So.
Well, maybe it was like a really rapid, like, radiation poisoning or something?
Perhaps. But I also, running through some of this, I'm not quite sure that any of this stuff is kind of sourced, because you go into and you dig into some of this, and some of these skeletons, like, it's never really mentioned about any type of unusual radiation. Like, they have been, like I said, they've been excavating these cities since the 1920s. And it's never really mentioned or noted about, in any of the archaeological journals or any type of like historical.
It's noted
text.
on every single video if you type in ancient atomic weapons.
Of course, yes. And of course, they put in there exactly where they got that information, right? They note the academic journal where it was
No.
published. No, okay, all right.
I remember reading about this when we did the Viamanas.
Yep.
case
Yeah, it
file.
came up for that for sure.
We definitely talk about this during the Famanas and things like this about these two cities, which are usually pulled into this whole thing. I mean, the archaeological locations themselves are extremely fascinating. Archaeologists and paleontologists like going through all of these. Like they said that these cities were extremely important, in the development of the Indus Valley civilizations. They were extremely successful. They had actually a lot of qualities of life that a lot of other civilizations at the time hadn't even developed yet. They had like things like flush toilets. They had like evidence of infrastructure and the way they built their buildings.
Listen,
There's a lot of stuff.
if they had toilets that flushed, I'm almost 100% sure they had nukes.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, yes.
Because right now, we have toilets that flush.
And we have nukes. That's sound logic.
I mean,
Get that.
technically, squatty potties also flush. So I mean,
Yeah?
those aren't hard to make.
Yeah, so
We have squatty potties,
So
and we
we're-
have nukes.
we're talking about atomic weapons, so we're talking about like our first bomb, like the destructive damage and the fallout. But what about like a neutron bomb, like a high dose lethal radiation bomb with low actual physical force? Like
Or
more
a
like
dirty bomb.
yeah, it's more like chemical warfare. Like you're just poisoning all these people, but instead of destroying the land.
I mean, sure. That could be a possibility, but even then, well, even some of that, perhaps like you'd have a lot of nuclear weapons have a thing where it's like, okay, you could possibly say that, oh, you wouldn't see any evidence of really radiation or radioactive substances because those substances that are highly radioactive have very short half-lives. So, they degrade over time into their components and whatever. They lose their electrons.
It's
whatever.
why people live in Hiroshima and Nagasaki now.
Right. Those places you
It's
will
safe
find.
now.
Yeah, they're safe now, 30, 40 years later, 50 years later. But the thing is that in some of these cities, you would still find isotopes that are products of these nuclear explosions that have half-lives of, tens of thousands, if not millions of years. They're not necessarily harmful, but you would find them in perhaps less concentrations than you would actual like the highly radioactive materials, but you could possibly detect them in a certain amount to kind of make it a viable theory that perhaps a nuclear weapon or some type of weapon that relied on nuclear fission perhaps had been detonated there.
Okay. So if depending on the type of bomb, it could be safe to live there after a short amount of time, or it could linger there for eons.
But either way, there would be proof, right? Like there would be some sort of proof, even this
Like,
even in today's age.
Right. One of the other evidence.
But see, we keep saying that. That's a good point, Andrew. Today's age, with the bombs that we make now, like maybe these things weren't exactly the same as what we can create now. Dan, I like the space beers you're drinking.
Got space
They would
beers.
take the same elements, though, right? Like you'd still be able. It's the same ingredients. You would imagine, unless they're using some fucking space
All right.
bombs or some
Okay,
shit.
so similar to how you described earlier, when like with their descriptions of things, we are now trying to put descriptions on things based on what we know of our technology now. Like this kind of looks like a nuke, but that doesn't mean that they had an atomic bomb. Maybe they had something similar that we just don't even understand.
Like they mine just like plutonium and just like use the hand grenades.
Maybe, but that's what I'm saying is we're trying to put our ideas and our understanding of like technology now back and fit it into these like puzzle pieces of like, well, what happened here? Would it have possibly been our technology we have now? I'm not saying it's not, but I'm saying maybe it was something similar, but just not quite the same, and that's why we're trying to jam a square peg or a triangle peg into a round asshole here.
A triangle probe into a round asshole is what you're saying. Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess if you're saying if say these were, because some people say, oh, it's the Anunnaki or like the progenitor god race that made us, and then we, for whatever reason, we weren't cutting it anymore, and they're the
We
ones
fell
that
out of favor.
Yeah, we fell out of favor, and they're so yeah, they have this advanced tech that we have no idea what it was. Maybe.
Yeah.
One of the other pieces of evidence that ancient
astronaut theorists
ancient astronaut theorists like to point to is that the presence of like things like vitrified sand or vitrified pieces of earth that they find in some of these locations,
It's atomic
especially
glass.
in places. So it's like, yeah, which is normally a product that you can find vitrified sand. Like you go out in the Sahara Desert, you go into these like, largely sand covered or dirt covered places, and you'll find like vitrified earth, which is a product of lightning strikes. So lightning hits the ground, such a heat that it turns it into a glass-like substance, and you can find this.
Well, yeah. Well,
But it
people
also
actually
occurs.
Sorry, Dan. Just on that note, if you search it, you can search that, and when the lightning hits the sand, if you dig at the sand around it, it looks like a giant piece of coral.
Yeah, it's super cool.
It's actually really
cool.
So it's pretty much at super high heat, like 2,000 degrees plus, like instant. It melts the glass and then it solidifies back into a form. And
Yeah. And I imagine if you were a wizard or a necromancer of some talent, you'd be able to use that for something. So
like casting shatter, you'd be able to make nice blocks of glass.
That's how you kill drag or what? Fucking what do you call White Walkers? Dragon's glass, man.
Obsidian.
yeah, that's obsidian.
Same shit.
Right. So yeah, because they found this I think when they first realized what it was from the first test blast, and they called it trinitite.
Right.
Which is it's atomic glass, high heat glass. It can form from nuclear bombs. It can form from meteoroid or asteroid impacts. Any type of rapid high heat.
Yes, but I was trying to look up because the trinitite is often radioactive, whereas like the stuff from lightning isn't.
The glass itself is radioactive.
Interesting.
Yeah, like the
Right, so that's what
trinitite-
makes a trinitite. That's what distinguishes trinitite from the vitrification, like just vitrified sand or fulgurite. I think it's fulgurite. That's what it's called technically. And so if it's radioactive, it's trinitite. If it's not, it's fulgurite or whatever you want to call it. And then so those are the two kind of different kinds. But some of these things, again, they point to these signs of like vitrified sand for the ancient astronaut hypothesis, and it's like, well, it's not radioactive, at least not now, so you wouldn't be able to tell the difference.
Well, I mean, in my mind, like a lightning strike would cause it causes like the coral-looking glass. But if it was a actual nuclear strike or a bomb, like an airburst and the heat all coming down, it would be like a sheet of glass, I would think, right? Like it would melt like a wide, like a radius of glass. It wouldn't just be like little specks, in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have little pieces. Yeah, you'd have little pieces and stuff like that. So if you had like I guess a strategically or a technology thing, you would just see like an entire sheet of glass, I suppose, as opposed to like the little bits and pieces that they do find in some of these sites, and then that is cited as evidence for an ancient atomic weapon being detonated over some of these cities.
Well, yeah, that's what a lot of people say, but it's really just evidence of a high heat event. In this case, if it's not radioactive.
Now, you have other... there's another one that we can talk about. So there's another location known as Lonar Crater. Now, Lonar Crater seems to be one of those perfect examples of both. It has both a literary evidence of the legends that surround it, and also being like an example of like physical evidence. So those two things together cooperating to kind of create this, perhaps what is some people say is the perfect evidence for an ancient atomic weapon. So this crater specifically was discovered in 1823, so it has been known about since then. quick fact that I didn't know, it's actually the third largest saltwater lake in the world.
Lunar Crater has a lake inside of it.
Yeah. It's 500 feet deep. It's got a 600-foot circumference. And prior to its discovery by a British explorer, natives in the area held the legend that the crater had been created by an actual battle between the avatar of Vishnu and the demon named Lonasura, which is where it gets its name from.
So a god battle, what they're saying.
Right, essentially, yeah. It came down to, it's kind of described as a battle where the demon had been hiding in the Lonar Crater, where that was kind of, they called its home. And in the legend, this avatar of Vishnu, one of the primary god, the primary god of the Hindu religion, came down, in order to answer the prayers of the villagers who were being tormented by this demon. And it's said that he kicked the rock off of the top of the crater, like there had been a rock covering of some type or something like that, and he had struck it, revealing where the demon was residing, and then being able to go inside and do battle with the demon and then slay him.
Slay the demon.
It's fucking badass.
For example, in Nick Redfern, if people are familiar with him, he's a very big paranormal, supernatural author. In his book, Weapon of the Gods, he kind of cites this as perhaps like an evidence for some type of like bunker buster weapon. Like maybe not necessarily nuclear, could have been like a tactical nuke of some type, where it's like perhaps this demon or perhaps a group. According to Nick Redfern, it was that the whole thing sprouts from the Anunnaki, and then it gets to there, and then there are these sections, or there are like rebel factions with that were residing on Earth at a time, and then perhaps they had an underground bunker at this point in Lonar Crater where it has been located, and they fired some kind of weapon down into the crater, or perhaps even that's where it was, like some type of mountain or some type of geological formation, and then created this crater, just like boom.
A little Kamehameha, basically.
A 3-episode charge,
Got
is
like
what we're
gun or
saying
something,
here.
yeah.
At least a 3-episode
spear
charge.
bump.
It's cool because all this shit, like even with this, like the ones that have chosen to like hide on Earth, it kind of reminds you kind of like, get into the Bible, like fallen angels and shit like that, right? That are like hanging out on Earth. Like it's so cool how this stuff just ties in like to each other, sides, right?
These are the ancient astronauts. Gods, all the gods and all the religious texts, those are aliens. That makes sense. They didn't come from here. They came from somewhere else. Therefore, they're aliens. Now, so this crater, though, I'm looking at it. So it's like 500 meters deep, 500 feet deep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It seems like really. So if you were to tunnel a bomb underneath the ground, it would make a deep crater like that. But if you blew it up on the surface, just like our first atomic bomb we blew up, it was a very shallow crater, 500 feet wide, but fairly shallow for the size of.
But that's why they're saying that maybe this is some type of bunker buster, because from my knowledge of bunker busters, whatever would impact the ground would go deep and explode from underneath.
Well, yeah, because there was already, like, they were in a bunker, right? They were already underground, is what I understand.
So it'd have to drill deep first before exploding.
Yeah.
Right, so you drop the bomb, you wouldn't even get down and penetrate the top, the top strata or whatever, and then detonate underground. Perhaps like creating the crater as the ground kind of like filled in what was at the bottom or whatever exploded.
Yeah, like maybe this was some sort of base.
Perhaps, but I mean, what I read and when you look into this Lonar Crater, it is the prototype meteorite impact crater. Like it's perfect. Yeah, it's like exactly. I first thought it was a volcanic crater, so it's in like basalt, but then that's been overturned, and they're like, no, this is most likely a meteorite crater. But as we've been saying, like those high heat events could be an atomic bomb. Like they kind of produce the same stuff.
the crater has been thoroughly studied, or from what I understand, it has been thoroughly studied. They've done dating on the crater itself and the material, geologic material surrounding the crater itself. So I think they're the two newest measurements that they have. They used what is known as argon radiometric dating, and found that it dates somewhere between 570,000 years and 656,000.
Dude, right at the time of the Anunnaki when they first came here.
Yes.
Isn't that what it is?
But that's what's tough for me though too, because
I'm not sure on the exact.
They say that.
Now that I think about it.
Yeah, I can't remember. But it's hundreds of thousands of years. Sorry, Andrew.
Well, just when you look at it from like the Occam's razor standpoint, right? Like we still to this day, we still have fucking asteroid shower or meteor showers, asteroids hitting the Earth and stuff like that, right? Like, what if we not have fucking nuclear bombs coming from fucking space randomly, right? Like, we don't have that. We have evidence of one happening, and then, well, in our, and as long as, looking back in literature, we don't have any evidence of it happening, right? So, like, even with all these stuff, there is no proper sources for any of these claims whatsoever.
Now,
just claims.
There's
fun claims.
There was some interesting things about Lone Rock Crater that I thought was that the fact that the accepted age was 52,000 years old, and then, as you said, Dan, the two newest ones dated at 570,000 years old, or somewhere between 570 656. Well, some of what I was looking into is that sometimes atomic tests can affect the reading of like the carbon dating and stuff, and it can make items like this appear much earlier than they are, which is why.
So it's kind of like when you check your taxes and your taxes go down. Is that what's kind
of? Well, no. So I'm like the test the initial test where they figured it was 52,000 years old. They're looking at
for your
that
credit score,
but those tests are affected by potentially atomic blasts, and they have evidence of that at like the Trinity site of like carbon dating and stuff around there of it kind of fucking up those tests.
It's not accurate readings.
So, not accurate readings. So it's like when they're doing those new argon tests, and they're like, "Wow, this is fucking way older than we actually thought." Perhaps that's because the tests that they were running before that we thought were, very accurate, were being thrown off by the, some sort of atomic test.
Interesting. Yeah, perhaps.
And I'd totally be down with that, except like the fact that a lot of the radioactive substances is like they all degrade, and all of that stuff that would probably affect that kind of dating would probably have decayed by now if it were like at least 1,000 years ago.
Well, what I'm saying, well, maybe whatever happened at this crater is older than that, right? Forget our concept of time. Like, say if the accepted age was 52,000 years ago, right? Maybe there was a civilization at this time. That's a long time ago, right? And maybe that's just whatever atomic test that happened, say 52,000 years ago. Yes, all the isotopes and stuff have degraded. There's nothing left of that, except when we do a carbon. The carbon dating, we're like, yeah, it's 52,000 years old, when it's really not, right? This crater is 570,000 years old based on other tests. So maybe like whatever happened at that time period has like captured a moment in time. I'm not saying it was an atomic test. I'm just saying maybe perhaps something happened, and our tests, we just don't know enough about that long ago, because it's just so long. It's a guessing game.
Yeah, I mean,
sure.
It is. It's, you have one measurement, and then you're like, actually, it's 10 times older. You're like, okay.
Yeah, I'm not read up enough. I'm not well versed enough.
That's some pretty
geologic dating mechanisms to be like, okay, argon is like the definitive what they use right now. I mean, I could probably get back to you on that as to what it is, but right now, off the top of my head, I'm not 100% sure as to what is the en vogue geologic dating.
Dan, I would like by next case file a 400-page report on all methods of geological dating.
It doesn't need to be 400. 20 pages is fine.
All right, I'll take a 20 page. I'll take a 20 page.
400 pages.
I just need a lot of pictures in it. That's what I need.
Yeah.
And pictures and graphs.
We're excited.
Yeah, pictures and graphs. That's all I need.
My appendix is going to
be at least 25 pages of stalagmites and
no
20 pages
needed.
of stalactites.
One of the other pieces of evidence for ancient advanced weaponry that I found really interesting that I had never really heard before for researching for this topic was that there is a certain number of what are known as vitrified forts, which we've already mentioned already, that the vitrification, the process of where applying high heat to a solid object makes it turn into like a glass-like substance, all of that.
Yeah, like burns the silicon or whatever.
Yeah, melting
hardens.
these rocks and solid substances into a liquid, and then it solidifying and very quickly afterwards. So there are apparently around 24 ancient fortifications across Scotland that exhibit all the typical qualities of ancient forts of that time. In respects of defensive placement, where you would put a fort if you were trying to defend a certain piece of land or a certain territory.
Attack.
Like a land-based human attack. But what makes these forts especially exceptional is that they all seem to completely lack mortar or lime of cement. So they don't have anything that joins, they don't really seem to have anything that joins the stones together. They don't have the usual binding agents that a fort, like usual forts of this time would that the architects would use at this time. So in place of mortar, the blocks appear to have been just placed on top of each other, carefully placed on top of each other, and then fused together as if they had been exposed to some type of intense heat source.
Well, this is Scotland, right? That we're talking about?
Yeah.
Yes.
Fucking dragons. Simple. Fucking simple, boys. Fucking dragons.
Dragonfire.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Sure.
But it does.
Bingo, bango,
Absolutely.
bongo. Case file's closed.
So no mortar, just seemingly these rocks had just fused together.
Yeah.
By dragon's fire.
It's interesting. It's some sort of like ancient welding technique almost. That's what I was thinking about, of like, potentially they had figured out how to, like, because what do welders get? It's 6,000 degrees? What do welders get to?
Depends on the
To
welder.
have affected the stone in such a way, I think it's estimated that temperatures somewhere in the area to 1,000 degrees Celsius, so 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, would have been required.
It's getting pretty hot.
Yeah.
Pretty
I
hot.
like
It's getting
starting a
hot in
fire as much as next guy. But is there anything like accessible to people like that, like people of this age, where you could light it on fire and it would potentially get this hot? Like, I'm trying to think if there's anything logical before I can say that like maybe this thing did get hit by some sort of insane heat wave.
I think the original theories were that perhaps these forts had been set on fire like ceremoniously after being captured